Since the end of Jim Crow, Freedmen Black American Community has become a very fragmented community, instead of being united. This thought process has led to a bunch of individualism in every facet of the Black community. This has been one of many downfalls of Black culture. It's time to get back to building Black businesses, creating financial power, building strong families, and strong communities. Get ready to listen to a powerful message from dynamic speaker Dr. Joy DeGruy as she speaks on American history and racism.
All right, let's talk about some present-day issues. There's an economic depression that some call a recession and argue about that. But what is your diagnosis of the impact that it is having on the African American community?
Well, I think just very simply put, those that are struggling or that have the less, economic means are going to suffer greater. And it's always been that way. I've often thought about the Depression, the Great Depression. And I, in school and even the media, there's an incredible history of pictures of people in soup lines, and there are pictures of people, families kind of living in this. It's almost never anyone Black identified. Because if you were to contrast that with the Black experience during the Depression, again, white man has a cold, Black man has pneumonia. So what we're seeing in terms of this is a greater desperation on every level, economically, socially. Everything is becoming much more heightened in terms of the African American experience, because again, having little and then having what you have that is there taken away there's a greater level of desperation, a greater level of fear, of anxiety, of suffering. So yeah, it's much greater.
Do you pick up much anger in the communities where you speak, African American communities?
Anger with regard to
the greed factor that many.
But here's the thing, and this is being talked about quite a bit. That when people start talking about we're going to have this war on crime and war on drugs, and we're going to go after it. And what's depicted in the media, we got numbers of police shows where you see them taking down the drug dealer and they're slamming them into the cars, and this is the drug dealer who had the little drug, and they busted it, and everybody's going, my goodness, how great. And I'm thinking, are you kidding me? This is how you're dealing with the drug trade? The multi-billion-dollar drug trade is by Joe Kid on the corner selling drugs and arresting him and his whole crew and maybe his family, and now everybody can sit comfortably. And we've not considered the fact that, well, there got to be folks that export it, that own the planes, that own multi-billion. It's not him, but the distraction is him. And those who are struggling there down at the bottom say, excuse me, you're coming after me. How about the old boy that went to jail that stole billions of dollars? How about him? Who's the bad guy here? And so what ends up happening is you create, and this is something that David Cole assessed. He talks about the whole idea of race and the criminal justice system, race and class, and the whole idea that it has an opposite effect. People are less likely to feel like I need to conform to the codes and the morals and the laws of a society that is not just to me, and that somehow turns its head when it comes to those who are really reaping the benefits economically of crime. And you pick the crime, white collar, blue collar, whatever collar you want. You begin to look at who's reaping the benefits of that. And they don't look like the people who we see on television being arrested. And so there is this kind of feeling of antisocial, if you will, a reluctance to embrace or to trust a system that identifies them as a culprit. And when we begin to look at it, when you unfold it in round, it goes on and on and on in terms of who's doing what and who's making the big bucks with crime. Straight up crime. But once again, it gets sanitized, you see. Because, I don't know, they're wearing suits. They're white. I don't know. But it gets sanitized. So you have this kind of anger that's reverberating on the ground where folks are trying to survive. And no crime is okay. Don't get me wrong. The crack dealer is no better in terms of his behavior and her behavior in engaging in that. But why is it this person here is demonized for that behavior? And yet these other individuals, I don't know, they get, luxury cells. And while they amass these fortunes and literally impact nations with it.
With the evaporation of jobs, especially in the African American community, this must cause great trauma in the household.
Well, yeah.
Can you talk about that?
One of the things that I live in Georgia, and one of the things that we're seeing is with the increased desperation becomes an increase in all other sorts of things, like, for example, stress and anxiety. So it has a physiological impact on people where the stress is producing illness. Not only is there that stress producing illness, but it's again producing a level of desperation where people are becoming much more fearful, not really seeing a way out in some ways. And so there's two things that happen. Again, I've said it before in the show. You implode or you explode, and both are happening. And part of it is economics. Part of it is it's relentless. There's no lift for it. And again, we have disintegration happening on a variety of levels because you have there's this kind of romanticized idea about America and what America, again, start going back to the Statue of Liberty and Ellis Island. One has to ask the question, where are these things for us? Now, the average person goes, well, if you just work hard and, you just keep your nose clean and everything will turn out okay.
Work hard where? At what job?
This is my point. It's got to be your fault. And if you start looking at this in terms of Elizabethan poor laws, this come out of Europe. They considered it some sort of a moral, spiritual deficiency for you to be poor. And they put you in jail for it, right? Something got to be wrong with you morally, spiritually, that you're poor, right? So you have this kind of feeling that people, and then the guilt associated with it. Why can't I get myself, why can't I? Again, there are no resources, and particularly in your community. But then whose fault is that? Well, if you people would we don't own the communities.
Yes, I've heard that phrase.
See? So all of those things that are set up, and far be it for me to, to look at and simplify the entire dilemma associated with the economic system in America, but we have to appreciate that people, are hardworking, good folk just trying to do their lives. I see them all over the country, but they're demonized.
All right, let's move back across the Atlantic. You have been to the Ellis Island. You've been through that, and you've seen the Statue of Liberty up close. Tell me about it. I see the catalogs here.
Yeah, this would be the first time a couple of weeks ago that I actually visited the Statue of Liberty in Ellis Island. I think there's a part of me, that had a vague curiosity, but because of the information that I kind of already knew, I never felt really all that, compelled to go. But I decided, a really good friend of mine who now works and basically is looking at trying to improve a lot of things around, these national parks. He said, you should go, Joy. So I went. And because I had already seen renderings, I'd been to France and was aware that there were various models of what the ultimate Statue of Liberty was to be, replete with chains. So I was very curious about how that would be handled. I also knew that the architect, the artist, and basically the producers, if you will, of the Statue of Liberty decided upon this statue in 1865. So, of course, this coincides with the end of the Civil War and consequently the end to slavery. The chains, which originally were in her left hand and at her feet, were struck from the statue, clearly. But I was waiting for an opportunity on my tour to ask the tour guide. So the tour guide, very enthusiastic man, he said, he's kind of explaining all these details. And so right off the bat, he says, are there any questions? I said, well, my question is, what happened to the chains that were originally on the Statue of Liberty? And he looks at me and he goes, thank you for asking that question. We will cover it a little later. So I kind of waited, and we went through, showing the dimensions and all of that, and I just waited. And finally, we got to the point where they actually had the different statues of those who were responsible for building the superstructure that it sits on, which is on top of a fort, all of these different things. And he said there was a little argument that went on. The artist wanted to really fought for the chains. He says, I really want those chains there. They were a part of acknowledging as a gift from France this idea of liberty and freedom, specifically one of the issues being the end of slavery, which, of course, the chains represent. And there were those in America that opposed it, saying we don't want it to be specifically focused on slavery. We want a broader sense of liberty. And there were all these various beliefs about why they didn't want it. So what used to be a left hand holding the chain became her clutching what looks like tablets. I said, well, help me understand how we reconcile. Send us your tired, your poor, your huddled masses yearning to breathe free. Help me understand how you reconcile that with the absolute obliteration of anything that suggests that slavery had anything to do with it. How did they reconcile that hypocrisy? And his answer was, I don't know how they reconcile what was an obvious hypocrisy. However, the chains are still there. I said, really?
Where?
Exactly. So I said, because I was there. I was literally there. And I said, well, are you kidding me? He goes, no, they're there. He says that was the one thing the artist fought for and won, that they would never be able to remove completely the chains. So then he pulled out the picture of the statue with the chains, and then he showed the chains, blown up picture of her feet. And there are chains there at her feet. However, they are not visible. The only way you can actually see those chains is if you happen to be in a helicopter looking down, okay, but from the pedestal. With a
zoom lens.
Yes, with a zoom lens. Shot. But from the pedestal, from anyone walking around, they are not visible. And I thought to myself, they are invisible like we are.
Let me ask you what might be a touchy question. Were any of the guides that you could see burnt of skin?
That would be no. Not that I could see. Most of the guys were European, or of European descent. And part of, I guess, my concern is I was coming. You have to understand, there were huge groups of people. Among them were children. Among them were students from elementary through high school, Latino, African, all, these children, on their field trip to the Statue of Liberty. And I thought about that as an educator and thought to myself, how unfair, how unjust, how inaccurate for them to walk through and see no reflection of themselves, when in fact the originator had them in mind. And here these black children are with no clue, and I'm wondering, because, I'm going back tomorrow. I'm going back. Right. Because I want to see unasked if they'll volunteer the fact that those chains were there. Because I wanted these children who basically could go through, walk around, and never know anything about these chains. And here's the other travesty. These are the materials they gave me. Anyone that comes, they'll see there's a Statue of Liberty one, and then there's the Ellis Island. There is no mention of it. Now, he showed it to me, but it's not mentioned in the literature. So again, it begs the question, why is that? Why is it erased? Then I went to Ellis Island, and then it gets clear why it got erased. So I come to Ellis Island. Now, you gotta understand, I'm ambivalent. Because I recognize there's two things that are going on inside of me. One is understanding the whole process of immigration and folks coming over, even though they were not sure what the life would be. It was going to be a better life. They were choosing something different. Many of them, not all of them, but most of them, were looking for a better life, despite the fact that they had no clue as to what that would mean. So you come in, you're issued into a huge hall, and there's a room that I now learned is called the peopling of America. Whatever.
What does that mean?
You'll see. So I go in, and of course there's an entire tour. There's an audio tour. So I got the audio tour of a friend of mine and I, and they're talking to you through all of the little parts. But before you get to that, there's another room, which is the peopling room, peopled. So I'm over here and I'm looking around, and on one side, on my left, is a huge screen, and on my right is a chart. And on the chart are the little, figures of the number of immigrants coming in from particular countries, right? So you see a lot of them, a little bit, and you see years. And I'm looking at that, and then all of a sudden I notice that there's a little legend, and the legend says, I want you to hear this, it says, non-voluntary immigrants.
Non-voluntary.
And I'm thinking to myself, well, now, can they just not say the word slaves? I mean, but you see, it got sanitized. And one might think, if you saw non-voluntary, that they just kind of got lost and showed up. Maybe they accidentally happened upon the land. But you wouldn't know they came in the belly of ships, that they were raped along the way, that they were chained in their excrement. You wouldn't know that. You just think of them as, well, they're non-voluntary immigrants.
All right.
The first area being kind of my final assessment and being in Ellis Island, and the other is looking at remedy and response to kind of a parallel process from Africa to here. When I told you I saw the thing about Africans, which is the only thing you see about black people is the non-voluntary immigrants, and then there's a huge screen which if you don't pay attention closely, it looks like some beautiful parts of the country. It's a moving kind of video thing. Mm-hmm. That's about natives and the number of tribes that it started off, and then how they were, quote, reduced. Again, we're going to clean that up because we're not going to talk about, well, they talk about the diseases that affected them, but how about what, well, it amounts to genocide. Okay, those words aren't used. Slaughter, genocide. No, reduced numbers. Then we move on, and what I want to speak to is when we start talking about how do we remedy this, how do we teach children of color, in particular in America, African-American children, to feel good about who they are, to strive, to want to achieve, to not feel helpless or victimized or any of those things that people get all twisted about. We go through, and you get to a point where it goes, imagine what it would feel like. A place you've never been. You don't know if you're going to be able to stay or go. Imagine what it must feel like living in these quarters. And I'm looking at the quarters, and these are like bunks, hammocks, 2 sinks. Looks pretty good to me, right? I'm going, imagine what those non-voluntary immigrants experience. And if you're going to put this picture up, put that one up too. How dare you ignore? Because you want me to empathize. You want me to feel the struggle and the suffering and the fear, and I'm okay with that. But who cries for them? The 10,000 buried in the African burial ground that's not on the tour. Where is the empathy for them? Where is the headphones saying, imagine? Not only not wanting to go, not knowing where you're going to go, and having your children, your wives, your people raped in front of you. Imagine that. Not wanting to go and not knowing where you're going. Where is the picture there? Then we're issued into another room where they say, and then they underwent medical prodding to determine if they were fit to stay or they're going to be sent back. And in this case, and I look closely because you know me, I look closely because I said, possibly could it be 1800s? We got to find J. Marion Sims in here, and surely his speculum is there. The speculum used to evaluate European women coming through. But did they tell you when they showed you Sims' instruments, the one who's standing in Central Park, that those instruments were developed by experimenting on black women? No, you see, that's not said. It just says, look at this instrument he developed, and these poor women had to undergo these sorts of examinations. Do you see? Mm-hmm. And so I'm watching this, and while I can empathize with that, who empathized? Where are the tears? Where are the tears? Where's the empathy of America? And that, to me, is part of the problem with why we're seeing a society of people who are done.
When we were on our way to the studio, you mentioned the desire to drop some reality around the shoulders of Thomas Jefferson.
Yes. And again, if people would read it, it's really clearly there. Thomas Jefferson, and in the close of my book, the soliloquy of Thomas Jefferson was fully aware of what the impact of the long-term impact of enslavement would be on white people and black people and everybody in between that were confused. He talked about the horror associated with slave masters did, and that their children imitated the behavior among their friends and younger children that were enslaved, and that built into a sickness on the part of Europeans and a hatred and antipathy on the part of Africans. And his greatest fear is that it would end in the extermination of one or the other race. He says, because God cannot side with us, meaning Europeans, in this contest. He cannot side with us, which means God will side with them. And it is only his hope. He says, indeed, I tremble for my country when I consider that God is just and that his justice cannot sleep forever. So Thomas Jefferson not only knew at the time the wrongness associated, but recognized the long-term impact that it would have. Clearly, these are his words. I'm not making this up. But again, it somehow gets absent of the curriculum. Somehow it gets removed, and we talk about all the other things that he was able to expound upon. And I think that if we're talking about healing, if we're talking about a response, we have to look and understand historically how the injury transmitted itself, what it looks like then, now, and then contrast that with Africa.
How can there be any healing if you don't get the right medicine?
Well, first of all, here's how it's got to start. It's got to start with unearthing the truth.
Yes.
Got to first start there. But you see, again, you have to ask this other question. What is the fear? I always look at these things and go, what is the fear of unmasking it? What will that mean? Not just to the people themselves, like Native people and African people and Latinos. What will it mean for Europeans to unmask it? And like I said very clearly, it'll mean little Brittany and little Tommy will see a different face of the America that they've been taught about. They will see something that isn't pleasant, hence non-voluntary immigrants, instead of enslaved people who were sold and chained and bred like animals. You see, that's a different picture. So what will it mean to unravel it? It'll mean that people have to look at this square, and they're going to have to own what has happened and recognize that this history is an important history. It is American history. And yet there is this feeling like, well, it's just so unpleasant. Those chains, wouldn't that be unpleasant to see those chains on the Statue of Liberty? Not if those chains represented what they were supposed to represent, and that was true freedom. It wouldn't be a sense of shame. It would be a sense of pride. But because it didn't do that, send us you're tired, you're poor, did not happen for people of African descent. Those chains would spell the total oppression which has occurred up until the current recent apology by the House of Representatives.
Okay. So you're saying that not only do people of African descent need to have this therapeutic process in order to regain self-esteem and motive to move forward, but whites need it too.
Absolutely. No, absolutely. You know, that the absence of this truth is a perpetuation of an ignorance that will result in all of our demise. And so what I think is that the fear associated with the truth, I think, is what is creating the problem. And I think once you get it out, we can begin to extricate it. We can begin to deal with it. But there's been so much denial, fear, guilt, pain, all of those things associated with these truths that we don't recognize that this thing is festering into a hot mess that doesn't have to. One of the things, again, the purpose of my work and even looking at this is, you know, not only was it a part of my own, kind of growth and development. But my purpose was to try to look at what did we lose along the way? What do we need to recapture? So my focus right now, which is, all of my work is really focused on healing. It's all focused on education, on learning. So the first learning was, what was it like in Africa? What is it like in Africa as it relates to Africans? What was injured through American chattel slavery and the oppressive eras that followed American chattel slavery was the destruction of relationships. If you were to kind of boil it down, I want you to stay with that theme because it is the focus, the matrix, if you will, that we use to get back through. And part of it is to look at what were relationships like. Well, it was collective, people worked together, there was this whole sense of tribe, the connection to land, all those things. Then you had chattel slavery, folks getting ripped off, taken places, traumatized, untreated by that trauma, continuing perpetual trauma. What did that result in? Well, from an African vantage point, as a result of that collective, that village, you have respect, you have honor, you have nobility, you have this sense of self, trust, all of this. Now, what do you have when you have a destruction of those relationships?
Chaos.
The polar opposite. You have the polar opposite of that. You have people who are suspicious, who are fearful, who are distrustful, are not willing to work with other people, that have fragmented senses of themselves and other people, and thus you have this kind of fractioning that continues to happen. So a question that comes up with, weren't we doing better at some point? That's always a question. And the truth is we were. During segregation, we started doing better because we started having to deal with things on our own and building some sense of that community back. Then it got fragmented by, hey guys, come on over here, we'll treat you like everybody else. So now we want your money, we want your community, we want your land, we want all of that in exchange for equality. Well, that wasn't true. Clearly wasn't true. So what happens then? So now what we're left with is this response. We're left with this fragmentation. The key is through the relationships. Recently on Black in America, there's a gentleman shown. This gentleman has a 100% success rate of getting young black students in college. 100%. I'm so happy he was there. The natural question I would ask is, hey, I got it. Let's replicate that. How about we replicate it? Because this is not rocket science here. But what does he have? And the reason why it's not so easily replicable is because it's him. Okay, hence he has a relationship with those children. He picked them up, he put them in his car, he put his heart, his soul, his life. Can you replicate him? Well, he's not the only one. But I would venture to say, and I would submit to you, every program, whether it's rehabilitative, whether you're dealing with youth, after-school programs, any of them, that the common element is relationship. Because you see, that's what's fractured. If I believe you trust me, you believe in me, you love me, young, old, in between, it is going to foster a sense that is going to have me not only believe but achieve. And that's something, an element, not rocket science. Look at any program, and you'll find that, well, when it comes down to it, they cared about me. They worked with me. They were there for me. They had my back. Those are all statements which suggest a relationship, which was firmly said at one point, that became fractioned now. So how do we get it back? How do we begin to create those things? You can't create a person, but that heart, that spirit is all over this country. It's black. It's not always black. You'll find it, like how do you replicate Mother Teresa? Okay? She was who she was. Martin Luther King, Malcolm. You see, there were those who have always would arise who felt that. But there are also many people who feel it. And that's the key, is to heal the relationship where it is. Where it is. And those young people believe in him. I would venture to say that sometimes programs here that are rehabilitative, prison, whatever it is, that when that person is removed, you throw money at it. Let's get 4 more buses. Then you get further away from what? The relationship. And you begin to see a different result. Because of the nature of the injury, it is the relationship that is most critical.
Okay, time for a last break. Malcolm X once said that land is the basis of independence, and it moves me to ask a question. Can you name any part of this planet where we dwell and control the economy where we dwell?
Sometimes we look like we control the economy. I don't know. Honestly, I'm sure there are areas, probably not very large.
Like this?
Yeah, not very large.
Where would you place that in your agenda for
Healing?
some healing?
No, economics is right up there at the top. It really is. I mean, so much of this has to do with, again, there's a point at which you don't care if you like me. It's not about you liking me. It's about me having the right to exist and to be independent and to be able to survive in my environment in a manner that is appropriate and fair and just. So justice is critical, and justice implies equity as it relates to financial issues, and we know that that's huge. Of course, everybody knows it's huge right now.
Because it's a shock to go to Africa and see the total domination of African countries by Europeans.
And Chinese. Yeah, at this point. Yeah, Chinese.
In growing numbers,
right? In growing numbers. And again, I think that we have to recognize that we have to function as a global society. And a global society has responsibilities. Now, we can ignore that if we'd like. And I think that just like we ignore the global ecological system, you can ignore it if you like, but it eventually comes back to get you. All of us, and I think similarly, as we begin to look at these economies of countries all over the world, we look at the Sudan, and we look at, things that have gone on. It's just basically we've turned a deaf ear. Ultimately, that's going to reverberate back because we are a global society.
And what goes around,
it comes around. And really, I think that there has to be a matrix. And I am, of course, on the side of the hands-on, working with people, and that's great. But at the end of the day, they don't have a place to live and can't eat and can't work. I don't care how good that make them feel. Okay, I don't care how clear they are about their identity or their connection to their ancestral roots. If I don't have a place to sleep, I cannot gain food, I cannot care for myself or my family. Now we have a whole nother ball of wax. You see, it has to be a parallel process that not only must we start looking at ourselves and, getting rid of certain behaviors, which I created a matrix to do that. We can begin to extricate that.
How can we self-examine? By what process?
There are a lot of processes, I think. The one that I've created and the one that, I've been working so long looking at this enough to go, okay, so how does one look at oneself? In my study guide, which is now printed and will be available very, very soon, within weeks. This study guide, there are parts of it where there's a matrix. So I give you examples from the book of what is vacant esteem, what is racist socialization, what is anger, what does that look like? Starting with enslavement. Well, those are clear. There's certain behaviors that happen, and then there are behaviors that came out of that: self-hatred, good hair, light-skinned. What is that term? High, yellow, gone to waste. Crazy stuff, right? You have that. You have this anger, this distrust, this ambivalence that you have to deal with. And then you have this socialization process which continues to lie to you. Well, how do you begin to eradicate that? Then you look at it. What does it look like in my family? For example, you look at your own family, brings you all the way down to yourself, and then it says, what is your response with all you know now? Now that I understand where it came from, I understand what it started to look like, then I looked at how Mama and Grandpa and cousin and Pookie dealt with it. Now I got to ask myself, with all this knowledge, what am I going to do? How am I going to perceive myself? Am I a Negro? Am I colored? Am I the N-word? Am I black? Am I African? What are you going to tell your children? And what of that information as you go through this matrix, this flow chart that helps you see it? What of that information is going to change now that you're going to share with the other generation? Not just with my family, but with the kid down the street and in the schools and within systems. How does one look at it? But you got to first be able to see the flow. That's the problem. We see enslavement. We don't see what it got to do with us. You got black kids right now that go, Afro, I don't got nothing to do with Africa. Right now. I don't have nothing to do with Africa. And if you look at the lyrics of Lil Wayne, it's scary, right? So you have all these different things. How did that happen? Where did it go amiss? That's why there has to be an assessment process. That's personally. On the flip side, there has to be justice. has to be justice. Because while all of this is going on, there has to be a system by which I can plug into that is just, fair, equitable to me, and safe. So one cannot happen without the other. There's a matrix. We can certainly work
Power
with that.
concedes nothing without a demand. It never has and it never will.
Never will.
Frederick Douglass said that.
That's right. That's right.
You concur?
I concur.
So we've got to find the tools and the weapons to bring that about.
Parallel process. We got attorneys. We got folks in political positions. We have folks in criminal justice. We have folks social service down on the ground. We've all got to show up for this one. And everybody else out there that's interested. We need to show up for this.
Why the absentia? Why aren't enough? We used to have a word in the community where I grew up called jive.
Yeah, we have a lot of words that mean the same thing, you know. I think that, again, that we, you know, he was in the frame, cannot see the picture. You know, that is largely what it is, you know. And then there's some folks that say, there's no picture at all, you know. So we've got to get at the very root of things. And again, it's okay for us not to agree. It's okay for us not to, you know, because we're all different people. But
Okay.
we got to understand that what's in the frame.
During the late 19th and early 20th centuries, Black Americans built thriving economic institutions, including banks, insurance companies, and commercial hubs such as Tulsa's Black Wall Street, Durham's Hayti District, and Richmond's Jackson Ward. These self-sufficient Black economies provided jobs, generational wealth, and a sense of communal pride. However, integration led to the decline of Black-owned businesses as freedmen Black Americans sought acceptance in white-owned establishments. With newfound access to previously segregated spaces, many Black consumers abandoned Black businesses, leading to widespread closures. Meanwhile, Black entrepreneurs faced discrimination in securing loans and maintaining businesses in the face of economic integration, which ultimately favored white and non-Black businesses. Today, non-Black immigrant communities, including Arabs, Asians, and Hispanics, have capitalized on this economic shift, establishing businesses in historically Black neighborhoods. Instead of reinvesting in their own community, freedmen Black Americans spend a disproportionate amount of money in businesses owned by these groups, further eroding Black economic self-sufficiency. Prior to integration, Black Americans fostered a strong sense of unity rooted in shared experiences, struggles, and aspirations. Black communities developed their own educational institutions, religious organizations, and social structures that upheld cultural pride and resilience. Integration, however, weakened these bonds as freedmen Black Americans were encouraged to assimilate into mainstream society. This shift led to the gradual loss of traditional values, practices, and the prioritization of Black interests. As new immigrant groups entered the economic and political landscape, freedmen Black Americans found themselves competing for resources and representation rather than standing united. The prioritization of multiculturalism over Black self-determination further diluted Black political power and economic influence. The arrival of new immigrant groups has had a profound impact on freedmen Black Americans' economic prospects. Many immigrants have been able to access government and private resources that were originally fought for by Black civil rights leaders. Programs intended to benefit the descendants of enslaved Black Americans have often been extended to all minority groups, diluting the intended impact on freedmen communities. Additionally, immigrant business owners often do not hire Black employees, further restricting economic opportunities. Many of these businesses extract wealth from Black neighborhoods without reinvesting in the community, leading to further economic stagnation. The competitive labor market has also seen Black Americans losing jobs to lower-wage immigrant workers, exacerbating economic struggles and unemployment rates within Black communities. They downplay Jim Crow as a temporary setback rather than a systemic effort to maintain racial hierarchy. The truth is, America was not built on freedom. It was built on conquest and white supremacy, a reality it has never fully abandoned. This is why there is such a desperate push to erase or distort history. When people learn the full truth, they begin to see patterns. patterns that expose how injustice has evolved rather than disappeared. The backlash against so-called critical race theory is not about education. It is about control. From book bans to rewriting school curricula, efforts to suppress history are designed to keep people uninformed and unquestioning. White supremacy is ingrained in American institutions, home, school, religion, and politics. And those who fear history reveal their own guilt. They know that an honest telling of America's past would destroy the illusion of innocence. It happened when the world saw Black Wall Street burn. It happened when the brutality of Jim Crow was exposed. It happened when the Southern strategy was unmasked as a tool of racial control rather than democracy. The systems of oppression never disappeared. They evolved. Slave patrols became modern policing. Redlining became housing discrimination. The plantation became the prison. And through it all, America has attempted to erase its crimes. Native lands were stolen through laws. Black freedmen Americans were denied land and wealth-building opportunities. Immigration policies were designed to maintain a white majority. When Black communities thrived, they were targeted by mobs, by bombings, and by policies disguised as justice. It was not enough to take lives. They had to erase entire communities. Highways were built through Black neighborhoods. COINTELPRO was used to assassinate Black leaders. Confederate statues were erected not in 1865, but during the Civil Rights Movement as a message of intimidation. And still, they expect us to believe in their version of America, one where slavery was just an unfortunate chapter, where the Tuskegee experiment is a footnote, where mass incarceration is an accident. But the truth cannot be erased. The real fear is not history itself. It is the reckoning that comes when people realize they have been lied to. A generation that understands the depth of deception will not trust blindly. And when trust is broken, people begin to question everything. That is what America fears most. Not its past, but the consequences of its lies. And no matter how many books they ban, how many voices they silence, how many distortions they spread, the truth remains. It spreads like fire, igniting minds and demanding accountability. The real question is not whether America will face its past. The question is whether America can survive what it has done. The fight to suppress history is not just about the past, it's about controlling the future. Look at the policies still in place today. Voter suppression laws disproportionately target Black communities, just as literacy tests and poll taxes once did. The school-to-prison pipeline funnels Black children into a system designed to break them before they can build. Discriminatory banking practices, like higher interest rates for Black borrowers, continue the legacy of redlining. These aren't relics of history, they are present-day realities. And when we fight back, they criminalize us. The same government that calls Martin Luther King Jr. a national hero today labeled him the most dangerous man in America when he was alive. The same system that praises the civil rights movement now has laws banning protests that challenge police violence. The same corporations that post Black History Month ads are the ones funding politicians who strip Black voting rights. They want us to forget. They want us to believe that history is behind us. But it isn't. Because the forces that upheld slavery, segregation, and racial violence are still at work, just under different names. The past is not dead. It is still shaping the present. And until we confront that truth, history will continue to repeat. The solution to these systemic issues lies in a conscious effort to rebuild Black economic independence, cultural unity, and family structure. Key strategies include: Black Americans must prioritize supporting Black-owned businesses, spending within their own community, creating a sustainable economic cycle similar to those in other racial and ethnic groups. Initiatives such as group economics, cooperative economics, and Black business directories can help redirect resources back into Black communities. Freedmen Black Americans have to get back to strengthening Black families. The Black family unit has historically been a source of strength and resilience. Rebuilding strong familial structures through mentorship, education, and economic support can provide a foundation for generational wealth and stability. Also, teaching future generations on the importance of cultural identity, such as promoting Black history, traditions, and self-determination through community-based institutions, media, and social movements will help reinforce a sense of identity and pride. Last but not least, political and economic advocacy is a must. Freedmen, Black Americans must advocate for policies that specifically benefit their community, rather than broadly applied initiatives that dilute their impact. This includes pushing for reparations, land ownership, and economic incentives tailored to descendants of enslaved Black Americans. So yeah, integration was intended to supposedly provide Black Americans with equal opportunities, but in many ways, it disrupted the economic and cultural self-sufficiency of freedmen, Black Americans. By prioritizing Black economic empowerment, cultural identity, and family unity, freedmen Black Americans can reclaim their lost progress and build a future of collective prosperity. The time has come to reinvest in our own communities and redefine success on our own terms. The civil rights movement is often hailed as a victory, a moment in history where America finally made good on its promises of equality. But for freedmen, descendants of enslaved Black Americans, it was anything but a victory. In many ways, the movement left us worse off, thanks to a combination of leadership betrayals, failed policies, and deceptive labels that diluted our struggle. One of the biggest failures of the movement was the emergence of Black leaders who prioritized their own political and financial gain over the needs of the freedmen community. Many of these so-called leaders compromised with white institutions in exchange for personal access to wealth and political influence. They embraced superficial integration while ignoring the long-term economic and social impact on Black communities. Rather than pushing for reparations, land ownership, and economic self-sufficiency, they settled for token positions in white-dominated spaces, leaving the masses behind. Affirmative action was another policy that was supposed to uplift Black Americans, but in practice, it disproportionately benefited white women and non-Black immigrants. Instead of addressing the specific injustices faced by freedmen, these policies became a catch-all for any marginalized group, diluting the intended impact. White women became the largest beneficiaries, securing jobs and educational opportunities that should have gone to freedmen. Meanwhile, Black immigrants, who had not suffered from American slavery and segregation, were lumped into the same category as freedmen, further pushing us to the margins. Perhaps the most damaging consequence of the civil rights movement was the introduction of minority and multicultural labels. These terms blurred the lines between the unique struggle of freedmen and the experiences of other racial and ethnic groups. Policies that were meant to address the oppression of freedmen were opened up to anyone who wasn't white, turning the fight for Black justice into a general diversity initiative. Corporations, universities, and the government all embraced diversity as a way to appear progressive while avoiding direct investments in the freedmen community. The fight for reparations was diluted into broader social justice causes that often left Black Americans without targeted benefits. The result? Our unemployment rates remain high, our wealth gap has barely improved, and the systemic barriers that were supposed to be dismantled still stand firm. One of the most urgent needs in the Black community today is the presence of strong legal minds who can fight for true justice. We need more attorneys and strategists like Thurgood Marshall and Johnnie Cochran, visionaries who understood that real power comes from mastering the legal system and using it to advance the interests of freedmen. We must establish think tanks that bring together legal experts, economists, and policy strategists to create a unified agenda for economic and legal justice. These groups must push for reparations, fair housing policies, and legal protections against discrimination that specifically target the issues facing freedmen. Without a dedicated legal and economic strategy, we will continue to see our demands ignored and our communities left behind. The battle is not just in the streets. It must be fought in the courts, in boardrooms, and in legislative chambers where real change is made. If we are to correct the failures of the civil rights movement, we must first acknowledge them. We must push back against the leaders who sell us out for personal gain. We must rebuild Black economic power by supporting our own businesses and institutions. Most importantly, we must reject blanket policies that treat all minorities the same and demand reparations and policies specifically for freedmen Black Americans. The time for symbolic victories is over. It's time for real, tangible justice. Tell me what you think about this topic. Hope you find the information in this video informative. Feel free to like, Subscribe, share, comment. Thanks for watching.